We started out by using a VLOOKUP function to assign dates to each of the IDs. And as you can see, this is our lookup value. Our table array is in the previous calendar sheet. And then here we have the range, and we did the same thing for available category. Now going into question one, the first graph we made was the types of asset using property type and count of property type variables. And this graph can show that the apartment is the most prevalent and popular because of its affordability. Now the second, we extracted all of these tables through the pivot table. So for this, we used the row labels for apartments and the sum of available category. It means the availability for each of the apartments throughout the time period. Again, apartments are the most prevalent because the same reason as the last. More apartments, there's more availability, all because of its affordability. Now, number of beds. The standing variable for me here is the apartments, and there's the most beds for apartments. This is because more apartments, as we concluded before, equals more beds. For host type, this is also a similar trend. The apartments are no surprise to have the most hosts due to its large sample size, therefore more likelihood of having superhosts. And lastly, we analyzed the asset rating per property, and we found that the most luxurious apartments, such as villas, condominiums, and guest houses, were the highest rated, while other lower end apartments, such as a camper RV, obviously there was no data, so that's why there's a div 0, and dorms, for example, were the lowest. Now, we compared the average price in dollars to the property type, and obviously the more luxurious the property here, the higher the cost. For this graph, we also analyzed the average number of beds per price. Now, typically the larger the number of beds, the larger the house, so therefore the more expensive it will be, and that's what we found from the upward sloping trend line as well, that there's a general positive trend between those two variables. Cleanliness and review score, they go hand in hand. They are a completely positive relationship. The cleaner the apartment, the higher the overall review score. Simple enough. So for this data table and graph, we marked the sum of availability for the first week of September. And as you can see, the availability decreases as the week goes on, and this conclusively shows us that September, the weather is more beautiful, the city of Boston is more vibrant, which is why in the beginning there's a high level of availability, but the second September starts to roll in, people start booking those Airbnbs. The neighborhood growth metric. Now here we can see that the central areas are going to be more expensive by looking at the graphs and looking at the values. So this one was a little tricky because there was no clear evidence just by looking at the graph if there was a relationship between the price and the date. So therefore we created a trend line, and within this trend line we found that there was a negative slope, which indicates that as the week went on, the price decreased, and that's because the highest demand is in the beginning of the month when people try to book, and as the month goes on, availability decreases and less people will book, therefore the price will go down. For this question, we used a growth metric, which was availability by month. This shows us which months are the most successful, which ones have the lowest availability. The highest availability means that the months of January through July, or the middle of the year, are going to be less in demand. Last, we found the outlier. The outlier we determined was in September for both of those years. I create a pivot table for the months and the sum of availability category per month. And then we have quarter one, quarter three, the IQR. We calculated this through simple formulas. And we found the IQR, the upper bound, the lower bound. And if it's true, that means it's an outlier. If it's false, it means it is not an outlier. And from our analysis, we can conclude that September is the most popular month for Airbnb in Boston. So this proves that Airbnb has a strong sales in autumn and has weaker results during the rest of the year. I advise Airbnb's Boston market managers to create seasonal marketing campaigns.